We're going to shift just a little bit here and talk about Ezra T. Benson. As soon as you say that name in LDS circles, the individual who comes to mind is the president of the church, Ezra Taft Benson. He was the one great grandson of Ezra T. Benson. And Jeff gave us a great analysis of the daguerreotype of Oliver Cowdery. Fortunately for us and Ezra T., we have some images of him. I've shown you the earliest one we have, and then the latest one that we know exists. To me, he's changed quite a bit in this photograph, in these two photographs. One probably taken in the early 1850s, and then the other one more towards the end of his life in the late 1860s. But it is a kind of a dramatic change. You almost wouldn't think it was the same individual. Nonetheless, a New Englander by birth, Ezra Taft Benson was born into a family of strong religious convictions on February 22nd, 1811 in Mendon, Massachusetts. His father, John Benson, gained a livelihood by farming and was able to provide comfortably for his family. When Ezra was 6, the family moved to the rural neighborhood near Uxbridge, Massachusetts. Being some distance from a school, the 7 Benson children were only able to receive a limited education. At the tender age of 14, tragedy struck when his mother, Chloe Taft Benson, died from consumption, leaving the children motherless. 2 years later, at the age of 16, Ezra left home. His older sister, Abby Ann, married Calvin Rawson, who purchased a hotel in Uxbridge and hired Ezra to work as his assistant for 3 years. Then in 1830, Ezra, now 19, went to live with his widowed grandmother, Hannah Taft, who also lived in Uxbridge, to take charge of the family farm. She died the following year, leaving her estate to Ezra and his siblings. I'm not sure why she didn't leave it to her own children, but she left it to her grandchildren, and that got him a good launch in his life. It was during this time that Ezra met Pamelia Andrus from nearby Northbridge, Massachusetts. They were married on New Year's Day, January 1, 1832. Pamelia would give Ezra 9 children, 5 of whom died in infancy. With the money from his grandmother's estate, Ezra purchased the hotel in Uxbridge owned by his own brother-in-law, Calvin, and managed it for 2 years before selling it after that time. In 1835, Ezra and Pamelia moved to Holland, Massachusetts, where he became a partner in a cotton factory with another brother-in-law, Orrin Andrus, his wife Pamelia's oldest brother. The business did not do well, and he lost money, but he had enough in reserve to buy a second hotel in Holland, which he managed for a time. He also became the postmaster in town. In 1836, Ezra felt inclined to go to the west, so he sold everything, and he and Pamelia and their eldest daughter, Chloe, started out. Stopping in Philadelphia, Ezra met a man who persuaded him not to go west at that time, but offered to assist Ezra in getting employment with a firm in Salem, Massachusetts, selling furs, wool, and other merchandise. Unbeknownst to him at that time, Joseph Smith paid a visit to Salem in August and September of 1836. I've always wondered if he may have known about that visit. Convinced Ezra and Pamelia then moved to Salem. He did so well that some associates offered him money to start his own business, but still feeling the desire to move west, he declined those offers. But in the spring of 1837, the Bensons left Massachusetts and struck out. Arriving at St. Louis, Ezra became acquainted with a Mr. Trowbridge, who gave Ezra some goods and merchandise, whereupon Ezra concluded to go up the Illinois River in order to sell his commodities in the region of Griggsville, Illinois, in Pike County. where, for the next 6 months, he traveled around the region selling his goods. I sold all my goods, he later wrote, moved down to the Illinois River where myself and a Mr. Isaac Hill laid out a town and called it Pike. Sold some town lots, built a house, and put a warehouse upon the bank of the river, cut cord and sold it to the steamboats. Ezra was not one to stay put for very long, but this time sickness compelled him to move to a healthier place. In late 1838, as the winter season began to set in, he felt prompted to search out a home near Quincy. Coincidentally, the move to Quincy occurred around the same time hundreds of Mormon families were finding temporary refuge in Quincy in Adams County. While Ezra tried to make arrangements for permanent housing, Pamela actually boarded with another family, a local family, and taught school to their children. While Ezra boarded with Tom and Mary Gordon, a Latter-day Saint couple who had been driven out of Missouri. Ezra eventually leased a plot of land 1 mile east of Quincy, but it was not until 1840 that he completed building a home on the property. But during this time, the Bensons became acquainted, besides with the Gordons, a number of other Latter-day Saint families living in Quincy. And he also began attending a number of Mormon preaching meetings. Among those who preached were Sylvester Stoddard, Edmund Bosley, George D. Grant, and Erastus Snow. He also remembered attending a debate in Quincy in which Joseph Smith was present, but the prophet did not speak or make any comments. In July 1840, Ezra and Pamela attended a morning meeting where LDS Apostle Orson Hyde preached, quote, a rich discourse on the gathering of the Jews and the rebuilding of Jerusalem, and then called upon Apostle John E. Page to pray. Ezra noted that Page's prayer was one that, quote, I never heard the like before, unquote. In the afternoon, Elder Page was a preacher and also spoke on the gathering of Israel. These two meetings, the morning and afternoon meetings, convinced both Ezra and Pamela to join the church. And on July 19, 1840, they were baptized in the Mississippi River by Daniel Stanton, president of the Quincy branch. The Bensons immersed themselves in the community, in the LDS community in Quincy, and made connections with the larger LDS community in Nauvoo. In October, they attended the church's general conference where they heard Joseph Smith preach for the first time. Ezra was also ordained an elder in the priesthood by Elisha Groves, and both Ezra and Pamela received their patriarchal blessings under the hand of Hiram Smith. Just 3 weeks later, on October 25th, Hiram Smith came to Quincy and organized the Quincy Stake. Daniel Stanton, the man who baptized the Bensons, was called as president, Stephen Jones as first counselor, and Ezra as second counselor. At the time of his calling, Ezra was also ordained a high priest. 5 months later, in March 1841, Ezra was feeling the pull to move to Nauvoo. He mentioned this to President Stanton, who told him he hadn't served very long in the stake presidency and needed to remain in Quincy a little longer. Ezra felt that he needed direction on the matter and went to Nauvoo to seek the prophet's counsel. Quote, he told me to come if I wanted, that it was all right and I should be blessed. He immediately returned to Quincy, settled his affairs, and moved to Nauvoo in time to attend the April 1841 General Conference and to see the laying of the Nauvoo Temple cornerstones. He remained in Nauvoo after the conference, purchased a city lot, and boarded with a church member while he fenced and plowed his new property and built a home, which he completed in just a few weeks. In Nauvoo, Ezra found employment working on the Nauvoo Temple. A year later, in June 1842, he received a mission call to serve in the eastern states. He preached in several communities en route to his home state of Massachusetts, where he preached in a number of towns and villages, including Uxbridge, where he had spent most of his youth and young adulthood. He visited family members and former acquaintances, none of whom joined the church. During the last 6 months, however, he labored in Lowell, Massachusetts, where he served as the president of the branch. During these last 6 months, he called on members of Pamelia's family living in nearby Ludlow, Massachusetts, who were not receptive, with one exception, Adeline Andrus, Pamelia's younger sister who accepted baptism. When he was released from his missionary service early in the fall of 1843 after serving some 16 months, Adeline and a few of his other Massachusetts converts accompanied him back to Nauvoo. Immediately upon his return, he began work once again on the temple. Within a few weeks after his return, perhaps as a reward for his devotion and service, on 19th of November, 1843, Ezra and Pamelia were sealed for time and all eternity by Hiram Smith. The year 1844 was one of trial and turmoil for the church and the Benson family. By this time, Ezra and Pamelia had certainly proved their loyalty to the church and its leaders. Recognizing that devotion, church leaders privately taught the couple the principles associated with celestial or plural marriage, which they were then expected to enter into. Adeline, Pamelia's unattached 31-year-old sister and Ezra's convert, agreed to the union. Thought I had that there. Well, I thought I had a picture over there, but I didn't. Adeline's sealing to Ezra took place on April 27, 1844, and Ezra would later marry 6 additional wives. Following the historic April 1844 General Conference, over 641 electioneer missionaries accepted calls to promote Joseph Smith's presidential candidacy. Ezra heeded the call and took another companion, John Pack, where the two labored in New Jersey. It was here they learned of the martyrdom of Joseph and Hiram Smith, and in July they returned to Nauvoo. That fall, Ezra was called to serve on the Nauvoo High Council that was followed by another appointment beginning in December to return to Massachusetts to preside over the saints in Boston, where he remained until June 1845 when he returned to Nauvoo with a group of Massachusetts saints. In December 1845, when the 12 began to administer the temple blessings to the saints in Nauvoo, Ezra, Pamelia, and Adeline were some of the first to receive their endowment under the direction and leadership of the 12. They also served as temple officiators. So now we get to the point where they will begin their trek here across Iowa. And I have to say that Ezra keeps an autobiography. He writes an autobiography, and he probably wrote it in 1846 or very, very near that time. And that's the only really autobiographical piece that he has left for us. But it's all about his Iowa experience, or most of it is about his Iowa experience, which I'd like to just follow along with his narrative and talk about, how he shows how he some of those experiences he had in southern Iowa. So much of what we know about Ezra T's Iowa experiences comes from that biography. At this point, we pick up the story when Brigham Young asked Ezra to be in the advance company that left Nauvoo in February. According to his record, the date of his departure was February 9th. At that time, he and Pamelia had 2 children, Charles, age 8, and Pamelia Emma, who they called Emma, age 4. Pamelia was also 8 months pregnant, and Adeline, his plural wife, was 7 months pregnant. Rather than wait until both women would give birth under more favorable conditions, the family chose to begin their journey west in the dead of winter. Then, now I'm quoting here, Brother Brigham requested me and my family to go with him. I had no property but a good brick house and a lot which I could not sell, he records. I asked Brother Brigham, what should I do to get away, not having a team nor any means to purchase one? He said, go out in the streets and inquire of every brother you meet till you pick one. I accordingly went in search of one. I called on a Brother Jared Porter, who had 1 horse. He said I could have that. I borrowed a wagon from a Brother Chittister and a horse and a harness from another person. Brother Stephen Farnsworth gave me cloth for a wagon cover. Brother Hezekiah Peck sent his son and a team to my help. I traded off my wife's shawl and other things with a man for about 200 pounds of flour. I gathered about 800 pounds of flour and a few bushels of Indian cornmeal, also 12 pounds of sugar and a few pounds of coffee and tea, and a little bedding and clothing, which is about the amount of luggage we had to carry in the 2 wagons. The horses being weak and poor prevented us taking much luggage. About the 9th of February, I started with my 2 wives and 2 children in the dead of winter, leaving my pleasant home and fireside. I left my furniture standing in the house, such as chairs, tables, bedsteads, and a clock. When we left, Brother Porter's family took possession. That was the one who gave him the horse. Took possession of the house and the things that were in it. We crossed the Mississippi River, leaving our beautiful city and temple, not knowing where we should go. We traveled to Sugar Creek, where Brother Brigham and the 12 and the High Council and a host of others had collected to organize themselves into companies. While we were camped, a very severe snowstorm came, followed by cold weather for several days. After the cold weather abated a little, the different camps took up their line of march through rain, sleet, and mud. The nights were cold and frosty, and of course, this is still in the winter, and of course, they're going to really be stuck with the mud. That's really, we've discussed that here at this conference. I think it's important to note, and this has kind of been mentioned, that it's going to take them longer to get across to Iowa than it's going to take them the next year to get all the way to the Valley of the Great Salt Lake. We arrived at Richardson's Point about the 15th of March. At this point, my wife, Pamelia, gave birth to a daughter about 11 o'clock on the 19th of March. It rained hard. We had nothing but a tent to cover her and had to raise her bed on brush to keep her from the water. Here the camps remained for several days in consequence of incessant rains which softened the land and made it difficult to travel, as the wheels of our wagons would sink at times to the hub. We named our child Isabella. And we learned a little bit more this morning about Richardson's Point, and I forgot his name now, but he mentioned this should probably be considered another way station along the southern Iowa Mormon Trail. And I thought that was very insightful, and I think we'd have to agree with that. So maybe we need to start referring to Richardson's Point as another way station along that trek. The road being so bad, I went to Brother Brigham and told him I could not proceed further on account of the heaviness of my load and the weakness of my teams. I told him I was willing to tarry there till I could get on further, to which he replied that I must not stop, but go with him and the camp. He asked what I had for loading. I replied 600 pounds of flour and a few bushels of meal. He said, quote, "Bring your flour and meal to my camp, and I will lighten you up." I accordingly complied, and to my surprise, he requested John D. Lee to weigh it out and divide it among the camps. This shows that they're sharing their extra, if you will. Leaving 50 pounds of flour and a half bushel of meal to support myself and family going into the wilderness country. When we started, I found my wagons rolled comfortably along, while many of the company's wagons would sink to their axles in the mud, and I would say to them, "Go to Brigham, and he will lighten your loads." Nothing particular happened to us between that point and Garden Grove, except incessant rains, which caused us to wade through mud. When I reached Garden Grove, I had to send back my team to help those I got it from. And they're doing that all the time. If they're going to lay over, use those teams to bring others to the next point. At this point, my wife Adeline, the second wife, gave birth to a son, and we called his name George Taft. Now here's Garden Grove, again 157 miles. Again, we would call this the first way station, but I'm liking the idea of Richardson's Point now. We have approximately 600 Latter-day Saints living here at its height, And we'll learn more. I think, who's giving that today? Somebody was going to talk about Garden Grove. Anyway, approximately 140 saints lived here, and we have the presidents here, Samuel Bent, David Fulmer, and Aaron Johnson. And this is where Adeline gave birth to George Taft. Now, there's an Iowa connection there. This is who our president of the church, Ezra Taft Benson, comes off of this son, the second wife, the first son of the second wife. And so this is George T. Benson on the left, who was born in Garden Grove. You can see he's the father of George T. Benson, and that's Ezra Taft Benson. Now, there is an Iowa connection with Ezra Taft Benson, and that is the fact that he came back here. He attended Utah State Agricultural College, then attended Brigham Young University, where he graduated, was the most popular man on campus. But he came to Ames, Iowa, to attend Iowa State University, where he received a master's degree. So he has some Iowa blood in him, or he had Iowa blood in him. I thought you might enjoy that. Talking about Garden Grove again, he said, this was a great place for rattlesnakes. Either an ox or a horse came up almost every night with a swelled head. I became much dissatisfied with this place, and it seemed as though I could not tarry there under any consideration. Brother Brigham told me if I could get a team to go on, I might do so, providing I could find a man to take my place, which Brother Aaron Johnson agreed to do. Brother Phippen let me have a yoke of very large cattle and a wagon with the promise that I should pay him back in a future day. I took the team and was ready to start by the time the rest were, and I felt as though this was the happiest day I had seen. He did not like Garden Grove. The road, by this time, the roads had dried a little, and we traveled much easier than before. We went to Mount Pisgah, another settlement over which Father William Huntington was appointed president, and Charles C. Rich and myself, his counselors. And I love this phrase. This was the first place where I felt willing in my heart to stay at since I left Nauvoo. Brother Brigham Young and the camps moved on and continued their journey till they reached Council Bluffs near the Missouri River. I remained at Mount Pisgah with my brethren, breaking prairie, sowing corn and vegetables, and making fences for 2 or 3 weeks, during which time myself and family had scarcely any bread to eat. For one night we had nothing little but parched meal and buttermilk. But in all this I enjoyed myself, as also my family, for never at any time did I hear murmur from their lips. Okay, so this is, of course, Mount Pisgah. We learned a little bit more about that this morning as well. First company arrived here on May 18th, and of course named by Parley Pratt. And again, Ezra Taft Benson was called in the presidency here. Over 300 Mormons died in this area, and this is where Captain James Alden, the 1st Dragoons, first issued the call out for the volunteers of the Mormon Battalion. And this is where Ezra Taft Benson will receive his call, which we'll talk about here, to be a member of the Quorum of the 12, the first apostle called since the martyrdom. And I mentioned in that one session earlier today, this monument was put up by Oliver Huntington, the son of William Huntington, who was the president of this branch. And it was put up in the 1880s, and it's probably the oldest existing monument for the church. Now, the Huntingtons put it up there to commemorate William, but it's really a memorial to all of the saints who passed through and stayed at Mount Pisgah. I should say that these communities, Latter-day Saint way station communities, were remarkably organized. They were organized with a presidency and 12-man high council. Of course, in Winter Quarters we had some bishops, but I don't see bishops being in Mount Pisgah or in Garden Grove. This presidency and the council, the high council, had extraordinary responsibilities. many of them very similar in some ways with some of our bishops and bishoprics and stake presidencies today, but they would assist in burials. They received and accounted for tithing as well as other donations, cash, animals, and commodities. They oversaw food distribution. They organized and presided over worship activities. They conducted priesthood ordinances, baptism, priesthood ordinations, priesthood blessings, the sacrament, and some marriages, not sealings. That was done under the instruction and by President Young. They kept wonderful minutes of meetings most of the time. They recorded the donations and disbursements of what things they were able to gather and use for the community. They were involved in road construction. They built and operated ferries to help ongoing Latter-day Saint wagons and families. They had to resolve personal disputes between members. They had to manage the livestock, and that was huge. As Dick Bennett mentioned yesterday, they had just much livestock. Of course, they had to supervise the construction of homes and outbuildings, fences and wells. And then when a family would move, another family would move into those homes. And of course, they would also determine when another family was ready to move on. So they didn't want to overcrowd any of the other locations. And of course, they're always involved in crop planting. I was interested to hear that over 1,400 acres were brought under cultivation at Mount Pisgah. 640 acres is a square mile. So that's over 2 square miles of cultivated property. So, about the 1st of July, my brethren wished me to go in search of the camps, which were ahead of them, which I heartily responded to. I borrowed a horse from Sister Rockwell and started and rode 2 days and a half. I had no tavern to call at. Consequently, I had to lie on the ground when night overtook me and made my saddle my pillow, and nothing but the canopy of heaven to cover me. Not being acquainted with camp life, I took no blanket with me. And then he says, I found the brethren comfortably encamped at the Council Bluffs. And I stayed over 1 day with them and attended to what business I was sent to do and received counsel from Brigham Young, as he had to give respecting our settlement. When I returned, the brethren were pleased to hear of the prosperity of the main camp. Well, at this point in time, much to his, he did not know this, but on June 27th, 1846, while he was probably en route to the main encampment there of the 12 here on the Bluffs, Brigham Young and the Quorum of the 12 had excommunicated Mormon apostle John E. Page from the church. And 2 days later, on June 29th, Brigham Young and the Quorum of the 12 met, and Orson Hyde nominated Ezra T. Benson to fill the vacancy in the Quorum of the 12 left by Page's excommunication. And immediately, Parley P. Pratt was dispatched to Mount Pisgah to inform Benson of his call. I just kind of think, well, the fact that he went there the end, or about the 1st of, he says around the 1st of July, but it might have been almost at the same time as they were meeting, that perhaps his presence there inspired Orson Hyde to nominate Ezra T. Benson. Well, according to the record then, Parley P. Pratt came from the Bluffs here, went back to Mount Pisgah, and on July 1st, he informed the community that Ezra Taft Benson had been called to be a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. And this is from the Mount Pisgah branch record book, and here's what the scribe took down of Parley P. Pratt. Brother Benson is nominated to take a place in the Quorum of the 12 to fill the place of Johnny Page, and left him to do the best he can in taking his family. So the expectation now is, of course, to meet here, bring him here so that he can be with the 12. The families of the council should be glad to follow on. So it sounds like there's more coming here. We shall make a call upon you for oxen, mules, wagons, and seed. We might be hauling him to the Bluffs. I will take him in an empty wagon and promise to pay hereafter. So trying to read through all of that, not sure what's happening, but Parley's trying to say, I think, we'll try to help get Parley there, or to get Ezra there, but at the same time, maybe you could, we might need some help. In the meeting, which he was informed he was an apostle, the clerk wrote down what he said in terms of that call. He said, Brother Benson said, I leave the place with the best of feelings and feel thankful for the confidence of my brethren and the council since I have been here. And if I have done anything wrong inadvertently, I ask your forgiveness. I have nothing against you, and may God bless you. So Parley and him start out, and while they're coming here to the Bluffs, they run into Brigham Young coming here. And they come back with Brigham Young and some of the other of the apostles who come now to Mount Pisgah. And then they meet, and Brigham discusses some things. And of course, they're now, I should say, his apostleship, his appointment to the apostleship took place on the 16th. Well, let me go there. He goes back there, and on the 16th, he's actually ordained. That's the same day the Mormon battalion had been completely called up. They're all ready and outfitted. And I didn't mention this, but Mount Pisgah provided, I think it was 64 men to be part of the Mormon battalion. So that really depleted the manpower in the way station of Mount Pisgah. So he recorded, he said, a brother offered to take my family to the Bluffs with his own team, and not owning a horse at the time, I went to see Brother Ross to buy one. He said he had none to sell, but said if I was called to be one of the 12 apostles, he would give me one, and he turned out to be the best riding horse I've ever had. And the next morning, Parley P. Pratt and I started for the Bluffs, and when we arrived within a few miles of the camp, we met President Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, and Willard Richards, accompanied by several brethren on their way to Mount Pisgah. I returned with them. When about halfway, I met my family. We stopped and took dinner with them. I left them well and in good spirits and proceeded on to Mount Pisgah. So, again, they got intercepted there, and then he says they did come and address the community and request volunteers for the battalion. And then after that, after Brigham Young had accomplished his business, I returned with him and the brethren to Council Bluffs. After the battalion started, I was called to Brother Orson Pratt's camp or tent, about a mile from the ferry on the Missouri River on the east side, so somewhere over here. And he said, I was ordained one of the 12 apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and many glorious things did he pronounce and seal upon my head. Brigham Young said I should have the strength of Samson. So he decides to give a little report of this and sends this report, this letter. This is the only extant letter we have of Ezra T. Benson. We do have a short letter that's included in the manuscript history of Brigham Young, but it's just simply the text that Brigham included. We don't have the original letter. But here's a little glimpse of what's happening on the 21st in Council Bluffs. Dear brothers, after so long a time, I write to inform you that regard to our journeys to this place, our reception here, and what has transpired since we arrived. We came from Mount Pisgah in about 3 days, held a conference with the chief of the Occoquan Indians and some of his tribe as we came up, and arrived at this point on Sunday evening. Since that, our time has been occupied in making out the companies to fill up the battalion. Again, that's completed now on the 16th of June. Excuse me, 16th of July. Colonel Allen, it is now complete and the men ready to march. There it is. Much pains have been taken to ascertain the most eligible spot for the brethren to winter in this region, and it is determined from the best information that this is the spot. And a council of 12 men, and they're going to set up a council here at the Bluffs, and he mentions all of them by name, have been appointed to preside in this place and counsel the brethren in all affairs, both temporal and spiritual, and to gather up the poor and so on. Also, several bishops have been appointed to see the affairs of those families whose men have gone into the army. So, Colonel Miller, I'm pretty sure that's George Miller, has gone on in order to cross the mountains this fall, and some 100 or 200 more wagons. He's proposing a different route, and of course Brigham and him will come to heads here. He's hoping to go up to the Yellowstone, and Dick Bennett talks about that in his book, how they were trying to see, maybe put an overland journey up to the Yellowstone, go up the Missouri to the mouth of the Yellowstone River. I mentioned that. Brothers Orson Hyde, Parley P. Pratt, and John Taylor will start in a few days for Old England. They're going to preside over the British mission and their families. The rest of the 12 will go up to Grand Island to winter and make an early push across the mountains. That was the initial decision. Let's at least get to Grand Island so we have a little head start next year. Colonel Kane of Pennsylvania has also assisted us and was much pleased and secured the great men of the nation who have undertaken our cause. Thus the Lord works in our favor. So obviously referring to Clint Kane's help and the call up of the battalion. And then all he says is, on Thursday the 16th instant, I received my ordination as one of the 12 under the hands of the 10 who were present. And it says, finally he says, it's been long proposed for me to go to the east and spend the winter. We know he goes there, but we don't know why he's going back. My thinking is he's actually going back to Nauvoo to counter the influence of James J. Strang. He mentions a brother Love and a brother Gardner. I'm not sure who that is. He says, there's been no more counsel, neither different for you or the brethren at Mount Pisgah. I don't have any more to tell you from the brethren. Yours with much respect, Ezra Taft Benson. So let me just quickly go here. So he arrives in Council Bluffs, and then, of course, that following January 14th, and Chad Orton talked about this today, Brigham Young gets the will and word of the Lord revelation, and verse 12, Ezra Taft Benson and Erastus Snorer to organize a company for the overland trek, and that would have been the big company that follows the Vanguard Company following that company out. Got to hurry here. He comes out. He's the first in part of the first company that actually enters the Salt Lake Valley, and on the 26th, I believe it was, of July, he's with Brigham Young and several other members of the 12 Apostles climb Ensign Peak and have a nice little hurrah celebration and a wonderful visionary fulfillment of Brigham Young seeing the ensign hoisted on the top of Ensign Peak overlooking Salt Lake City. He's one of the first to start back on the trail, and on that journey, he's carrying the mail. So he's going to reach many of the other companies as they're coming west, and he was probably the first to tell them of their success in reaching the Salt Lake Valley without incident. He arrives back, and he's probably one of the first of the 12 to get back, and he was there on the occasion of the meeting and the erection of the Kanesville Tabernacle, and the meeting, the historic meeting of actually, again, December 27th, exactly 3.5 years to the day of the martyrdom of Joseph Smith. We have 8 of the apostles present, and of course the decision had been made to reorganize the First Presidency, and this was done in a formal conference on that date. And I don't know if you know who those apostles are. We have some missing, but we're missing John Taylor, of course, and who's the other one? Orson Hyde, and then Lyman White is down in Texas. So 8 of the 11 apostles there, and that's that painting in the Kanesville Tabernacle. I just love it. I hope that can be preserved. Let me just close with this. If Ezra had hopes of immigrating to the Salt Lake Valley in 1848, it didn't happen. In January of that year, he left Kanesville and went east on the East Coast on a mission to solicit funds to finance the overland migration of the saints. We know he was in New York City, and he likely went to Massachusetts where he had family, and also in other parts of New England where he had business connections. It is not known when he arrived back at Kanesville, but we know he was there in October 1848 when Oliver Cowdery and his family came to Kanesville and was rebaptized. Of course, we just heard from Jeff Walker. Now, he's not mentioned in the notes, but he didn't know Oliver Cowdery like George A. Smith and Orson Hyde did. So we have 3 apostles there, but only 2 are mentioned, but Ezra T. Benson is there. Ezra T. Benson finally immigrated to Utah beginning July 1849 after arriving 3 months later in October. 1 month after arriving back in the Salt Lake Valley, Ezra and 3 other men were given the mill and timber rights in the area of present-day Stansbury Park in Tooele County. He hired out the construction of a mill, which was completed in 1851. The mill operated for over 100 years and has since been restored. He completed another mill, a grist mill, in 1854, forming a mill complex. The area and community around those mills became known as E.T. City. Ezra reportedly sold 2/3 of the ownership of the mill property to Brigham Young in 1860 when Brigham Young called him to preside over the Latter-day Saints in Cache Valley. In 1869, Benson and 2 other men struck a contract with the Central Pacific Railroad to grade a portion of the rail line in Weber Canyon. On September 3rd, 1869, he was in Ogden supervising the project when he died unexpectedly. We think it was a heart attack. He served as a member of the Quorum of the 12 for 22 years. He's buried in the Benson plot in the Logan Cemetery. Benson left a legacy of community building in Iowa, Tooele, and Cache Valley. 2 communities are named after him in honor. Two communities were named in honor of him in Cache Valley. Mendon, named after his Massachusetts town where he was born, located at the base of the Wellsville Mountains, and Benson, a small town near the bend in the Bear River as it comes through the Cache Valley. His original home is located on 100 North between 100 and 200 East in Logan and sits just below the Temple Hill and just east of the Logan Tabernacle, although the home has undergone several renovations. When I was growing up in Logan, the home was in my ward boundaries. One of my best friends, a Benson descendant, lived in the home, and I played with him there many, many hours and many days. It was not until I was a teenager that I learned it was Ezra T. Benson's home. I am a great-grandson of Ezra T. Benson, and I'm proud to be a descendant of this great pioneer. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We've gone just a little over time, so we just ask you to ask your questions to the presenters on your own, if you will. We're going to take just a 5-minute break, a little stand-up, quick break, and then we'll be beginning our next session. And so thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Alex, for those wonderful papers and presentations.